The trouble with wild boars is that they're smarter than you might think. They're not just these big, clumsy animals roaming around. They're clever, persistent, and extremely determined when it comes to finding food. Once they sniff out something tasty, like my garden, it's almost impossible to stop them without serious measures. I had seen the damage they caused before. Plants uprooted, holes in the ground, and even little pathways they made through the grass. It was like they had marked my garden as their personal buffet. I tried everything at first to keep them out. I put up wooden stakes, built a simple wire fence, and even tried motion-activated sprinklers. But those boars just kept coming back. It was frustrating to watch all that hard work destroyed in just one night. That's when I started researching electric fences. I read articles, watched videos, and talked to some local farmers who had similar problems. One thing I learned quickly was that electric fences work because they create a psychological barrier, not just a physical one. The animals don't want to get shocked, so they learn to avoid the area altogether. But it has to be done right. Too weak a charge, and the boars won't care. Too strong, and it could hurt them badly, which is something I wanted to avoid. The key was to find a balance, enough electricity to give a sharp but harmless shock, just enough to teach them to stay away. I decided on 3 wires for my fence, running parallel to each other about 75 centimeters above the ground. The spacing was important too, close enough so the boars couldn't sneak between them. I used sturdy posts spaced about 15 meters apart, making sure the fence was strong and stable. I also added clear warning signs, just in case anyone walked by and didn't realize the fence was live. Safety first, right? Installing the fence took some time and effort, but it was worth it. I tested it carefully to make sure everything was working properly, and before long, the damage to my garden started to slow down. The boars seemed to get the message. They would come close, sniff around, but then back away quickly when they felt the shock. It was like a peace treaty. I kept my garden safe, and the boars stayed out of trouble. For a while, everything seemed perfect. I felt relieved and proud that my solution was working. I even told some neighbors about it, hoping they'd appreciate the effort I put into protecting my land. But that's when Karen stepped in. She never liked the fence. To her, it was an ugly reminder that our neighborhood had a problem with wild animals. She complained that it ruined the look of the street and made the place feel less friendly. I tried to explain to her why the fence was necessary, how it was protecting my property and even helping the neighborhood by keeping those boars away from other yards. But Karen wasn't convinced. She said it was an eyesore and that I should find another way. I thought maybe if I showed her how the fence worked, she might understand better. But I didn't expect what happened next. One day, I was out running errands when Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. She went to my fence and started cutting the wires. I wasn't there, so I only found out later when she told me herself, sort of. At first, she was embarrassed. Then she admitted she didn't realize the wires were electrified. She just thought it was a regular fence, and she wanted to get rid of it. What she didn't expect was the shock she got when the wire snapped under her pruning shears. It wasn't dangerous, but it was enough to make her jump and drop the tool. She was shocked, literally, and a little shaken up. I can't say I blame her. Those electric fences are meant to surprise anyone who touches them without caution. When I got back home, I sat down with Karen to explain everything again. I told her how the fence worked, why it was important, and how it wasn't meant to harm anyone, just protect the garden. She listened, this time a little more carefully. I think the shock was a wake-up call, not just physically, but mentally too. After that, Karen stopped complaining so much. She even started to help me keep an eye out for the boars. I guess sometimes people need a little push, okay, maybe a little jolt, to understand why certain things are in place. It was a strange situation, but it made me realize how important it is to communicate clearly, especially when it comes to things that affect more than just one person. I also learned that wild boars aren't just a nuisance for me, they're a problem for the whole area. That fence wasn't just my barrier. It was part of a bigger effort to keep our neighborhood safe from damage. And while Karen's approach was way off, it reminded me that not everyone sees the world the same way. In the end, the fence stayed up, and so did my garden. The boars stayed out, and Karen learned a lesson about respecting boundaries. both mine and those set by nature. And me. I learned that sometimes, even the best plans need a little extra patience and a good conversation to keep things peaceful. You know how sometimes neighbors just don't know where to draw the line? Well, that was exactly the problem I faced, and it all started when Karen decided to take down my fence. But this wasn't just any ordinary fence, it was something special, something I put up to protect my garden from a very unusual threat. Wild boars. Yes, wild boars. And trust me, those creatures can cause some serious damage. Imagine waking up one morning to find your entire vegetable patch torn apart, the soil dug up like it was nothing more than a sandbox for these big, muddy animals. I tried everything, scarecrows, loud noises, even flashing lights, but nothing kept those boars away. So I had to get creative. After some research and advice from experts, I installed an electric fence. Not just any electric fence, but one specifically designed to keep these wild boars from barging into my property. Now, when I say electric fence, don't picture something that zaps like you'd see in cartoons. This one was carefully set up, with low voltage but enough to give a firm warning to any boar thinking about crossing over. The fence had 3 wires running horizontally, spaced apart just enough to make sure the animals wouldn't try to sneak through. I put the wires about 75 centimeters off the ground, which is the perfect height for wild boars, and spaced the posts 15 meters apart to cover the whole area efficiently. I felt safe with that setup. My garden finally had a fighting chance. But little did I know, the real fight wasn't with the boars, it was with Karen. Karen's always been the type to speak her mind. She has strong opinions about everything, especially when it comes to how things look around the neighborhood. And in her mind, that fence was an eyesore. She told me once, "That fence ruins the whole vibe of the block." I tried explaining why I put it there, why it was necessary. But she wasn't having any of it. According to Karen, I was just being paranoid, and those wild boars wouldn't come anywhere near the neighborhood. One afternoon, I was busy working in the garage when I heard some strange noises outside. At first, I thought it was the boars again, but then I realized it was something else. I looked out the window and saw Karen, armed with pruning shears, right next to my fence. She wasn't just trimming a branch or anything harmless, she was cutting through the wires. I froze for a moment, trying to decide whether I should shout or just watch. I knew the wires were live, and even though the voltage was low, it was definitely not something you wanted to mess with. But Karen didn't seem to care. She was determined to get rid of what she called that ugly barrier. As she snipped the first wire, I could see her face twist in surprise. Then she let out a loud yelp, dropping the shears immediately. She had gotten a shock, just like I warned she might if she touched those wires without knowing what they were. The look on her face was priceless, part shock, part confusion, and maybe a little bit of fear. I rushed outside to make sure she was okay, and thankfully, she was just fine. No injuries, just a story she would never forget. I explained again why the fence was there, why I needed it to protect my garden from the boars, and how dangerous it was to mess with an electric fence. Karen listened, maybe a bit sheepishly this time, realizing that what she thought was just a silly fence was actually a serious line of defense. That whole event got me thinking about how sometimes people don't realize the impact of their actions, especially when it comes to other people's property. Karen didn't mean to cause harm, but she crossed a boundary she shouldn't have, literally and figuratively. It was a lesson for both of us, really, me, to communicate better, and her, to respect what others do to protect their homes. But honestly, watching her get that little shock was also kind of satisfying. Not in a mean way, but in the sense that it reminded her, and maybe a few others, that some fences aren't just about looks. Sometimes, they're about survival. And this isn't just a story about a fence or a neighbor dispute. It's about how nature, humans, and boundaries collide in unexpected ways. It's about the wild animals we don't see coming, the neighbors who think they know better, and the things we do to protect what's ours. So yeah, Karen cut down my fence. But she didn't know that hidden inside those wires was a defense designed to keep wild boars out, and a little electric surprise waiting for anyone who dared cross it without permission. Karen wasn't exactly the quiet type, and everyone around knew it. She had a way of making her opinions heard, no matter what. So when she started complaining about the fence, I figured it was going to be a long road ahead. At first, it was little things, snide remarks when we passed each other, eye rolls when I mentioned the fence, and those subtle hints that she thought I was making a fuss over nothing. I tried to keep things calm. I explained that the fence wasn't just some decoration or a random choice. It was a necessary line of defense against the wild boars that had been tearing up my garden. I told her how the electric wires worked, how they were set up to give a safe but firm shock to any animal that tried to push through. I even showed her the signs I'd put up warning people not to touch the fence. But Karen wasn't convinced. To her, it was just a nuisance, a barrier that didn't belong in the neighborhood. One afternoon, I was out running errands when things took a surprising turn. I got a call from a neighbor, someone who didn't usually bother with our drama, telling me that Karen was near my fence and it didn't look good. I hurried home, my heart racing, wondering what was going on. When I arrived, I saw Karen holding a pair of pruning shears, looking determined. She was cutting through the wires. I couldn't believe my eyes. I wanted to shout, to stop her, but I wasn't fast enough. As the shears bit into the first wire, I saw a sudden jump, a quick jerk, and then she dropped the tool with a startled yell. She had gotten shocked. The electric current gave her a sharp surprise, enough to make her pull back instantly. It was a moment frozen in time. Karen's face was a mix of shock, pain, and disbelief. She wasn't hurt, but the unexpected jolt shook her more than she expected. I rushed over, trying to make sure she was okay. She was breathing fast, rubbing her hand where she'd touched the wire. I could tell she was embarrassed but also a little scared. As I helped her steady herself, I explained again about the fence, how it was designed to protect my property from wild boars, how it wasn't meant to harm people but to give animals a warning. I told her the shock was safe but enough to teach a lesson. Karen listened quietly this time, no longer arguing or complaining. The whole incident became a turning point. After that, Karen started to change. She stopped bad-mouthing the fence and even began to respect the purpose behind it. I caught her watching the boars from a distance one day, shaking her head but not saying a word. It was like she finally understood that this wasn't just about appearances or neighborhood politics. It was about protecting what's important. What surprised me most was how this little shock brought some unexpected peace between us. Karen and I started talking more, and instead of arguing, we found common ground. She told me stories about other problems she'd faced with wild animals, how she wished she'd known sooner about the dangers and solutions. I shared what I'd learned from installing the fence and the ongoing battle with the boars. It made me realize how easy it is to jump to conclusions or make assumptions without knowing the full story. Karen didn't mean to cause trouble. She just didn't understand the situation fully. And maybe I could have done a better job explaining things from the start. There's something about neighbors, right? You live close enough to be involved in each other's lives but sometimes far enough to miss important details. It's a balance, and it's not always easy. But that moment, when Karen got that surprise shock, was like a reset button. It reminded us both that respect and communication go a long way. I think we often forget how important boundaries are, not just the physical ones like fences or walls but personal boundaries, too. Karen crossed mine by cutting down the fence, but she did it without realizing the full impact. That little shock made her stop and think. From then on, Karen didn't just back off. She became a bit of an unexpected ally. She started helping to watch the garden, warning me if she saw any wild boars lurking nearby. We even talked about how neighbors could work together to keep the area safe, without stepping on each other's toes. It's funny how a simple fence and an electric shock could change the dynamic between neighbors. But that's life, full of surprises, lessons, and moments that make you see things in a new light. Karen's action, though frustrating at first, ended up bringing a new understanding. And you know what? Sometimes that's what it takes to turn a tricky situation around, an honest conversation, a bit of empathy, and yes, a little jolt to shake things up. After that shocking moment, things didn't just settle down quietly. The electric fence had made its point in a way words never could. Karen was more cautious now, but also curious. She started asking questions, not the usual complaints, but real questions about how the fence worked, why it was necessary, and what I had been dealing with all this time. She wanted to understand the wild boars better, which surprised me. I mean, who wants to learn about boars? But Karen was different now. It wasn't just about her opinions anymore. It was about something real. We started talking about the damage those animals caused, the roots they dug up, the plants they destroyed, and the mess they left behind. She even admitted that she'd seen some of it herself when she was out walking. It was interesting to see the change. Karen, the neighbor who once saw the fence as a nuisance, now seemed to respect what it did. And honestly, I began to see her in a new light too. She wasn't just being difficult. She was just unaware. And that's something a lot of us can relate to. Sometimes we judge before we understand. One afternoon, Karen showed up with a small bag of supplies. She said she wanted to help reinforce the fence. I was surprised but grateful. Together, we checked the wires, tightened the posts, and even added a few more warning signs. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like the start of something different between us. We began keeping an eye out for the boars together. Whenever one showed up near the edge of the property, we'd watch quietly from a distance. The boars were smart. They'd sniff around the fence, test the wires, and then back off without causing any damage. It was like a silent agreement between us and the animals. That fence wasn't just a barrier. It was a message. The neighborhood started noticing too. Some people came by, curious about the fence and why it was electrified. I explained the whole situation, the wild boars, the damage, the need for protection. Karen backed me up. She told our neighbors how important it was, even if it didn't look perfect. That surprised a few people, considering how vocal she had been before. What really hit home was when Karen told me she wished she'd known sooner about the fence's purpose and the boar problem. If she had, she said, she never would have touched it. It made me realize how often conflicts start from simple misunderstandings. If we all took a moment to listen and learn, a lot of trouble could be avoided. One evening, as the sun was setting, we stood by the fence watching the boars in the distance. The orange light made everything look calm and peaceful, even though we both knew how much chaos those animals could cause if left unchecked. It was a strange moment. Two neighbors, once at odds, now united by something neither of us could have predicted. Karen laughed and said, "I guess that fence isn't so bad after all." I nodded, smiling. Sometimes it takes a jolt, a shock, or just a little time to change how we see things. Since then, I've been thinking about how important boundaries are, not just the fences we build but the respect we show each other. Karen's actions reminded me that sometimes people cross those lines without meaning to, and sometimes they need a reminder. The fence was that reminder for Karen. I also realized that protecting something valuable, like a garden or even just peace of mind, isn't always easy. You have to be firm and clear about your boundaries. And sometimes, you have to expect the unexpected, like a neighbor cutting your fence or a wild boar testing your defenses. But what really matters is how you handle those moments. Karen and I could have let the fence incident tear us apart, but instead, it brought us closer. We learned from each other and found common ground where there was none before. The wild boars are still around, of course. They haven't disappeared overnight. But they respect the fence now, and so do we. It's like a quiet truce between nature, neighbors, and the boundaries we set. And every time I walk past that fence, I'm reminded of the story it tells, not just about wild boars or electricity, but about people, respect, and how sometimes a little shock is exactly what we need to see things differently. Living with wild boars nearby changed a lot about how I saw my neighborhood. These animals aren't just a rare nuisance, they're a real problem. Their strength and stubbornness can make even the best garden look like a war zone. Over time, I learned a lot about how to live alongside them without constantly losing ground. The fence was just one part of that, but it taught me even more about patience, persistence, and sometimes, creativity. One of the most surprising things about having an electric fence was how it changed the way I thought about boundaries. Not just the physical kind, but the invisible lines we all have with people around us. You know, those limits about respect, space, and understanding. Karen crossing that fence, cutting it down, felt like a violation at first, but it made me realize that sometimes, people don't see those boundaries clearly until something happens. It reminded me that not everyone operates the same way. Some folks need a direct lesson, while others just need a chance to understand. Karen was definitely the latter. After the shock, she became more careful, more curious. She wasn't trying to be difficult anymore. She just needed to see the bigger picture. That experience made me think about other things in life where boundaries get crossed, whether it's with neighbors, friends, or family. We all have invisible fences in our lives, and sometimes those get broken without us realizing it. What matters is how we respond, whether we fight, ignore, or try to rebuild. In my case, the electric fence became more than a tool for keeping boars out. It became a symbol of protection and respect. I made sure the signs were clear, so no one else would get hurt or surprised like Karen did. I also learned to communicate better, explaining why the fence was there and what it did. I realized that being open and honest about why you set limits can prevent a lot of problems. Wild boars are tricky because they don't respect human rules or social niceties. They follow their instincts and look for easy food. That means any garden, lawn, or field is a potential target. I saw them digging up everything from vegetables to flower beds. The mess they made was frustrating but also a reminder that nature doesn't always fit neatly into our plans. That's why the fence had to be both smart and humane. I didn't want to hurt the animals, just teach them a lesson. It was important that the shock was safe but effective. Setting it up wasn't simple. I had to research, buy the right equipment, and carefully place everything. But it worked. The boars got the message, and my garden survived. Of course, I kept learning. I talked to neighbors who had similar problems. We shared tips about fencing, animal behavior, and even ways to discourage the boars without causing harm. It felt good to be part of a small community trying to solve a big problem together. Karen, surprisingly, became part of that community effort. After her shock, she even helped me reinforce the fence, and sometimes would share stories about the boars and their antics. It was funny how a moment of conflict turned into a connection. We learned to respect each other's boundaries and work together. That's the thing about living next to nature. You have to be flexible and ready for surprises. Wild animals don't follow city rules, and neighbors don't always agree. But with patience, communication, and a little creativity, you can find ways to coexist. I still see the boars now and then. They test the fence, sniffing and nudging. But they don't try to break through anymore. The electric wires remind them that this garden is off limits. And the fence reminds Karen and me about the importance of respect and boundaries. Sometimes, I think about how different things could have been if Karen hadn't cut the fence. Maybe she would have kept complaining quietly or ignored the problem. Maybe the boars would have done more damage. That little shock changed the story for all of us. It also made me appreciate the little things, like having a garden that grows without being destroyed, a neighbor who understands, and a fence that keeps the wild where it belongs. Those things aren't small when you've seen what happens without them. Every time I walk by that fence, I'm reminded of that day, the shock, the surprise, the conversation that followed. It's a reminder that boundaries matter, but so does understanding. Sometimes, it takes a little shock to wake us up and make us see things clearly. And who knows? Maybe that fence will save the garden for years to come. Maybe Karen will be the one to help fix it when the wires get old. Maybe the boars will keep wandering off, respecting the line we've all learned to live by. Life is full of boundaries, some visible, some not. It's how we handle them that shapes our stories. For me, that electric fence was more than just a fence. It was a lesson in respect, patience, and a little unexpected teamwork.